Hello and welcome to another episode of Culture Crafters Podcast. I have here Danielle Baldwin today, and I'll tell you who she is in a second because I'm really excited about this episode. I met Danielle. I had a privilege of presenting to her group. She runs locally here in San Diego a couple of groups of CEOs, peer-to-peer Vistage groups. And we'll talk a little bit about her group. I wanted to speak with her because she struck me as a leader who was able to build the psychological safety inside her groups and all of the groups. I have this workshop. It's a trust building workshop that I present to groups. And part of that workshop is actually measuring psychological safety inside the group. And a lot of leaders don't want to do that because, hey, what if it comes back that we have low trust in the group, and trust is so critical. I love Danielle when you were like, do it. Let's run it. Let's see it. And then we can work with it. I love your leadership style, the type of members you attracted. It was such a courageous, safe space to do this hard work. So thank you for that. And thank you for your willingness to be on this podcast and kind of talk about what creates that culture, like what creates the team dynamic that you were able to repeat over and over and over. So, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. We loved having you. I mean, that workshop was phenomenal. My members still talk about it. So we
Thank
are
you.
I'm honored that you would ask, and we were grateful that you were able to present it. I mean, it blew
Aw,
our doors off. So thank you for that.
thank you. Thank you so much. Well, trust is a big piece of culture, right? And we
Yep.
talked a little bit about today's topic will be about inspiration and how do
Mhm.
we inspire leaders? How do we inspire organizations? And the way it relates to culture, when I think of leaders that I speak with and I ask them, like, why do people quit? So many of them keep referring to compensation. They're like,
Mhm.
well, someone is poaching my employees on LinkedIn right now. And I'm like, it is true. You're correct. And that is something that sometimes it's outside of your control. When we run culture assessments, we ask people, why do you stay? And they
Mm.
always prefer relationships.
Yeah.
Nobody ever told me that, hey, Anya, it's because like they introduced this new tool into our CRM. Like that literally never happened. What they talk about is, I love my team. I
Yeah.
love people I work with. I love my boss. I love where the company is going. Like these are all the things. And is that your experience too?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a member who is in SaaS, right? Software as a service. And he's very conscious of what he pays his team. And he always pays right around 51%, right? They're constantly doing market studies. So he's not overpaying, he's not underpaying, he's right at the midline. And because of the culture he's built in his organization, his retention is like 99%. People leave the organization when the organization chooses for them to exit, but it is extraordinarily rare. And especially, I mean, we all know just a few years ago, I mean, it's eased up a little bit,
Yeah.
but employees, I mean, they were. I had an employee like, CEO say, well, they're getting double the salary. And there are some instances like that. But you've got a perfect example of an organization that's paying right in the midline, right? There are
They're
49% of
fair. They're
companies that
fair.
are paying more, and they have a 99% retention rate because they've built this really strong culture, very inspiring culture. Actually, I had a one-to-one with the same member, and we were talking about inspiration. I'm writing this book on inspiration, and this member is the reason. So he had done skip levels with his entire company. So they had done
Mhm.
meetings. Each of the directors or VPs had met with their direct reports, and they had asked these three questions. Do you understand what your role is? Do you understand where the company is headed? And then, like, how are you feeling in general?
Mhm.
And he said, Dia, it's so weird. When they met with their direct report or they met their direct managers, they said, yes, yes, and I'm feeling really motivated. I was like, okay, well, that's great. And he said, but when they met with me, they said, yes, yes, and I feel inspired. And he's like, why do you think that is?
Mm.
And I was like, well, I don't know why that is. And he's like, well, what is inspiration anyway? And I was like, well, I don't know. And so now 3 years later, I have a much better understanding of what inspiration is and how it works and where it comes from.
Oh
So
my God. I'm so excited to share this because I think like this is such a thank you for sharing that example. It's great. And again, it's interesting that the power dynamic, right? That's the language they used with the founder and a CEO and a visionary
mhm,
versus the manager. So
mhm.
yeah, let's dive in. I'm so excited. Like let's talk a little bit about motivation versus inspiration. And
Yeah.
I know you mentioned a study where by HBR, I think, where they talked about inspired organizations, inspired employees. Can you share that with me?
Absolutely. Bain and Company, in conjunction with The Economist a few years ago, did this study on inspiration in the workplace, right? Because it seems a little like loosey goosey, like, what is this? What are we really doing?
Like,
And
rah,
everybody,
rah, let's
yeah,
go.
like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And everybody thinks of the Edison quote, like, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And what they found, I think to their surprise, was actually the opposite. So they applied Maslow's hierarchy of needs to employee needs. They built a pyramid, right?
Hmm.
And it had these three tiers to it. So the first tier was satisfied employees. The second and tier was engaged employees. And the third was inspired. And these were the differences between the three. Satisfied, if you
The
are
bottom.
looking for a satisfied employee, yeah, that's right. Bottom rung, right? We're not even talking about dissatisfied. We're just talking about like this is
Yeah.
baseline. They feel safe, right? They feel safe at work. They have the tools and the training and the resources they need to do their job. They're rewarded fairly for what they're doing, right? When we look at engaged employees, so we're going one tier up here,
Hmm.
what they found was they were kind of surrounded by this extraordinary team, right? So their leaders had hired well, there was a lot of talent in the organization, they had autonomy, right?
Hmm.
So a little bit different. It wasn't all just directed, like
Yeah.
I can make decisions that are impacting my work. They were learning. So there wasn't a staleness to
Yeah.
what their environment, and they could see the impact that they were making.
Meaning, yeah.
Yeah,
See, what I do matters. Yeah. It's not just.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Right. So then we get to inspired. So you're thinking, oh my gosh, what could possibly be bigger than this? And there were two main things. The employee aligned and gained meaning and inspiration from the mission of the organization. So, something that the organization was doing, whether it was the way in which they were doing, the population that they were serving, resonated deeply with the employee.
Mhm.
And they're inspired by the leadership. So, that's the craziest thing about this study, I think, is they looked at the productivity between baseline, what's a satisfied employee do, and then what does an inspired employee do? 250% difference. 250%.
Unbelievable.
Isn't that crazy?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I thought it was nuts. But that when we talk about having an inspired culture, right? A lot of the stuff that you do to work with organizations on culture and improving that. And people say, like, does it really make a difference? Like, really, is this
Yeah.
necessary? And to be honest, no, you don't have to do it. There are millions of companies that are uninspired. Like, have at it, man. Do your 3 to 5% growth. You can still be profitable. I'm not saying it's necessary, but I
Yeah.
mean, would you rather have a 250% more productive employee? I think I would. I think anybody would, right?
But it's
Um,
like also more fun. Like, I want to have fun. I think if you look at Maslow's pyramid, right? Like, I
mhm.
look at a business and myself. It's like first you have to cover your bills.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, now I can pay my mortgage. What's the next level? I feel safe.
Mhm.
I create interesting, and then you get to a point where it's like, I want to have fun.
Mhm.
You want to have fun with your members. You don't want to include members that you're like, ugh, like I don't like being around them. I don't like
That's
their
right.
energy. Like you get to a point, even if we think of like leadership teams, right? I look at
Mhm.
leadership teams and sometimes they're great teams and they would talk about talent and they would talk about expertise and they would talk about, like you said, we are good at forecasting and we're good at planning, but it's like the energy is like, and then you have other teams who are like kicking ass, who are like 10xing their businesses, who are so on fire. They love what they do. They
Mhm.
love the product. That is a completely different environment.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
just the leader has so much more clarity and can share the mountaintop. So
Hmm.
they can say, "Hey, this is where we're headed," kind of craft a hero's journey for with
Hmm.
either the employee or
Yeah.
with the customer as hero and say, "This is why it's important. This is why your work matters.
Yeah.
This is how you contribute. This is why we need you. This is why you're so valuable," right?
And I also think not being afraid that when you clearly articulate why the values and what it is, to not be afraid to lose talent. Because I think you said something around listen, hire right from the beginning. There are a
Yeah,
lot of skills you can build. Like I can build a ton of skills for your leaders.
absolutely.
I can inspire them. Like if
Yeah.
they're not naturally, intrinsically driven by what it is you do in the world, like
Mhm,
that is the element, or they're not in alignment with your values, they don't believe what you believe,
mhm.
like that's a no-go for me.
Yeah, it's the truth. Like if we take inspiration up, right? Well, even take it out of the workplace, like let's take it up to the 60,000 foot level. What we find is in order to inspire somebody, there needs to be an alignment with either a value or a goal. So,
Yeah.
for example, right? I don't want to run a marathon. There are plenty of stories of people that have run marathons. And while I am inspired by, there are these two types of inspiration, inspired by and inspired to. I'm
Mhm.
inspired by that, but it doesn't cause me to take action. I'm not inspired to,
Yeah.
right? So that's one piece. And then there also has to be like an alignment with a value. So that is why when we see leaders really taking into account and bringing culture into their interview process to ensure there's alignment, then
Mhm.
we know further down the road when we're looking to inspire, we can do that. Because if you're hiring just for skill set and there's not an alignment in culture or in vision, right?
Yeah.
Or value, you're never going to be able to inspire them. They could potentially be a great employee, like,
Yeah,
but they're
they'll
never going to be
execute. They'll
inspired.
execute. Yeah, they'll execute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
right.
totally. So tell me, you work with a lot of CEOs, you see CEOs, and that is asking for a friend. But it's like, how do they inspire themselves? Like, and has that been part of your book that you're doing research? It's like, I look at someone who has achieved all of their goals. They have
Mhm,
surpassed their goals,
mhm,
financial goals, maybe
mhm.
relationship goals. Like, how do they keep finding that fire and inspiring themselves?
It is an interesting process. So the thing about inspiration is it's fleeting by nature, and you can't just like snap your fingers and be like inspired. Like
Yeah.
that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting project in that there are these three components that I found that build to inspiration. So there are these two psychologists, Thrash and Elliott, that have done most of the work on psychology, in psychology on inspiration. And so they found that there are these three precursors. So I'll lean into what those are. So the first one is kind of what I term stillness.
Mm.
So it's that ability to like really slow your mental highway, right? Most of us have like 18 lanes of thoughts going through all the time, right? And we need to slow that down.
Yeah.
Um, we also need to be able to create space. So we're creating space in order to be still. And then the third element is self forgetfulness. So
Mm.
working outside of ourselves, thinking outside of ourselves, community is a very good way to do that, right? Because you're aligning with a community that has similar goals or interests, right? It's why like religious organizations of any kind, right? You bring a bunch of people together that have the same values and goals, right? It's a very powerful place. And
Yeah.
that's true in nonprofits. It can be true in organizations, right?
Mhm.
So, but what we find is it's much or what I've found is that it's so much easier for you to inspire other people if you in fact are inspired, right? So,
Oh, yes.
yeah, I mean, years ago, I think it was my first Vistage meeting actually. And I had a member walk in and she was telling the story about the fact that her employees were not engaged at all. They were very flat. And she was like, they're not inspired. We're noticing productivity had kind of gone down. And the more the group dug in, what we found was that it was her. So her VP of sales had left, had taken the entire sales team. And this is like a month after they moved into a space that was like
Oh,
twice the size, right? So she's heartbroken.
yeah.
And she hasn't really processed this betrayal. And she is carrying it with her into
Yeah.
the office every day. And so the employees are just mirroring back to her what they see. Like, oh gosh, this isn't looking good, right?
Yeah.
So the team kind of brought that to her attention. Like, hey, the issue is not them. The issue is you. And if you
Yeah.
fix you, this should fix them. And lo and behold, she came back the next month and said, my employees are telling me that I look different. When I'm on the phone with vendors and customers, they're telling me I sound different. And she was like, and we've seen an immediate change in the organization. And I just didn't know it was me. I just
Mm,
didn't know.
yeah.
Right.
And that's, I think that's such a powerful, right? Again, like point of having this peer-to-peer group, a safe space where people can say, because I mean, I'm sure nobody that she works with could turn around and be like, sorry, it's you. You're
Yeah.
inspiring. I like to say that to CEO. Like,
Yeah.
so it's like I love that she had that feedback and was able to shift it, which brings me to a point of like, you can't fake inspiration
No.
because I think it's energy. You know how they say like confident, just fake it till you make it. And I
Mhm.
feel that inspiration and that vision and the drive, it's energy, it's palpable. And that's why like I still love doing in-person retreats and offsites
Yeah.
because it's so much easier for me to build that fire and trust when we're in
Mhm.
person because I
Yeah.
feel you. I'm not
Absolutely.
thinking you, right?
Mhm.
So, is there something that you think about energy and, like, again, how do you enroll people almost like energetically into your?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and you're right on with authenticity. So when I look at inspiring stories, right? And this can be anything from Viktor Frankl to, the
Mhm.
local executive director of a nonprofit you're involved in,
Yeah.
right? It can really be anything. And there are these 5 elements. I think of them as chart, right? So
Mhm.
there's courage that's exhibited. There's some sort of hindrance, right? There's something that's come up. But the A in chart is authenticity.
Mhm.
And a story can't be inspiring unless it's real. So, like, I think of James Frey. Do you remember A Million Little Pieces? Do you remember that book?
I don't. I don't think
It
so.
came
No.
out, I don't know, maybe early 2000s, and it was when Oprah's book club was big, and it was
Okay.
meant to be a memoir. And so this guy goes on Oprah's show and is talking about this memoir, and it's about his recovery and all this other stuff. Well, as we come to find out, a lot of that was exaggerated. And I will not get into the debate about
Yeah.
whether memoir is exaggerated or not.
Yeah.
But the challenge is a story that was wildly inspiring for a lot of people because they believed it to be true and authentic. The bottom fell out of it because the authenticity fell out.
Mhm.
And,
Oh,
like, I don't know, Anya, have you ever seen somebody that's, like, up there and you can tell that it's, like, a very rote, like, "Oh,"
it's
right?
fake.
It's
Like,
fake.
listen, I'm an immigrant. And I bring that up because I'm like, I can pick up fake quickly. And people can, like, you're not tricking anybody. And I see that all the time also with leaders. They're saying all the right words,
Mhm.
but it's like the energy is not there. And I coach people on that. And it's interesting because again, like you said, what do you do if you are tired? You are exhausted. Like if you are a CEO of a company or even a business owner, right? Everybody's freaking tired. We've had 4 years after pandemic.
Oh my
Like, and I think there's a part of authenticity in that, right? And finding maybe even being vulnerable with your team and saying, how do we as a collective find inspiration?
Mhm.
Like how do we rejuvenate ourselves? Like where's that? So which brings me to like I'm a very practical person. Have you found any tools? So someone who is going to be listening to this podcast and is like, yes, I want more inspiration in my life. I want to inspire
Mhm.
my people. I want to inspire myself.
Mhm.
And you said already the stillness and the space, right? Is there any other, I don't know, routines, behaviors that maybe you have implemented in your life that keep you going?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. It's very frustrating, I'll say this,
Yeah.
because it requires a fair amount of what I refer to as flexible discipline.
Mhm.
So, around spaciousness, it really is about being clean on what your inputs are. You have to be really disciplined about saying no. You've got to have good boundaries.
Yeah.
There was a book that came out that I read voraciously, so I apologize for that. So, Doris Kearns Goodwin, um, who wrote Team of Rivals, which won the Pulitzer years ago, just before the pandemic, came out with a book about leadership, and it was leadership in like critical times. I'm
Mhm.
blanking on the exact name of it.
I'll
And she
find it. I'll
compared,
take notes. Mhm.
what's that?
I'll find it and I'll put it in the notes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And what she found over the course of these four presidents, right? Both Roosevelt's, Lincoln, and maybe Johnson, was in order for them to be the best that they needed to be to lead the nation, they took time away.
Mm,
They needed stillness in order to be able to make some pretty critical decisions that were going to impact the entire nation and the world,
the
right?
world. That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
And so often I feel like as leaders, we have this tendency, especially if there's a big decision coming up, that we like clench and like we hold on. And it's actually counterintuitive, but it's the opposite of what we need to be doing. So when we can engage in like stillness, and stillness doesn't mean physical stillness. I'm just trying to get the superhighway to slow down, right?
Yeah.
So whether that's like meditating or it's running or it's gardening or it's woodworking,
Yeah.
if you can engage in something, right? Like Ryan Holiday talks a lot about this too, from the perspective of the Stoics, right? There's something to be said for like giving yourself that time. And I coach my CEOs constantly on you have to give yourself more like as your organization grows, the the level of decision making and the types of decision making you're making are bigger,
Yeah.
and they need more of your brain power. So that means you need to reserve more of it, right? So
Mhm.
you need to be still, right? You need the spaciousness. You need to build the team that's going to be able to do the day to day. You need to learn to delegate, right? All of those things.
Yeah.
And then if you're looking to like inspire your employees, it's really just like supporting them. It's doing what we saw in that Bain and Company
Yeah.
study, right? But it's really just like holding this mirror up to them and showing them their potential.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Seeing potential. We talked a little bit about seeing potential in them and
Mhm,
mirroring it to them and being able to articulate their potential. I'm
mhm,
going to add one more tool. I think what I'm seeing with CEOs often and really, really successful people, they forgot how far they've come because
mhm,
they're always measuring forward, right? They're
mhm,
still feeling short. They have this
mhm,
like big audacious goals, they have this target, they're all, and I think sometimes they forget. And I had a recent experience where I had to almost remind the CEO, I'm like, were you like, look at the clients that you work with right now, right? They're serving right now.
mhm,
What would you like, or your like 10 years ago, what would you say about that? They'll be like, "Pff, that's unbelievable. That's like, that would never happen. I would never work with clients like this. I'd never make this type of money." And I think sometimes reversing and looking back and saying, listen, how do you share that with your team now? Go back
mhm.
and be like, guys, let's just pause. Because we're so stuck in that like highway, right? Of like, next, next,
Yep.
next, next. It's like, pause, go like 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and be like, what kind of problems were you solving back then? And what were your dreams back then? And where are you now? And bring that energy into the room to say, can you believe, guys, like you talked about the journey, the hero journey, you're on a journey. Like these are the clients you work with. I want people to go home just like how I feel. I would go and do a barbecue and be like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm working with this company. This is unbelievable. It's on my
Absolutely.
website, like we are working with them. So I
Mhm,
feel like maybe sometimes that space is also to do some journaling reflection and bring that into this space and include your people being part of the journey of where
mhm,
we've been,
mhm,
where we are now, and where we're going.
mhm. Yeah, I love that. I love that exercise, and I think if you're looking at even putting that within the frame of chart, right? So pointing out like the points where you had courage, right? And when I say courage, I don't say bravery because courage like has fear in it.
Yeah.
So what was a fear like a fear-based decision like you did it anyway and there
Yes.
was a hindrance, right? There was something that you guys had to overcome, whether it was a new competitor in the space or launching something. It's always going to be an authentic story if you're telling it, right?
Yeah.
And then where was your resilience? And then the really important part that we see in inspiration is T, it's transformation. So
Mhm.
exactly what you said, right? Oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine working with these clients, right? But you overcame. There was a lesson you needed to learn. There was something that you needed to learn to do differently. You were able to do that, right? When we grow, it's scary. So there's always an element of like, oh,
Yeah.
but there's also resilience, right? So sometimes in a lot of these inspirational stories, including the ones from our past lives, we've fallen down, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
not always about the tip of the iceberg. It's about what we see underneath the water and being able to relay that to your team, like either on an individual basis and saying, you remember when you were really struggling with X and look at what you did. Like, look
Yeah.
at how beautifully you handled that. Or us as a company. I think that's a beautiful exercise.
It's like, how did it change us? I'm
Yeah.
thinking of like when you talk about that transformation, we went through that experience and it changed us as a whole. And
Hmm.
it created new standards. And maybe we said, you know what? We are raising our standards.
Hmm.
Like if we used to have like, I don't know, our customer base was like 5,000 and now we won't even touch anything under 50,000. Like that is a transformation. It changed our mentality and it changed our standards and boundaries almost
Hmm.
like we are a different company as a result of that or we are a different team. And I think yeah, like that space would allow people to almost like remind themselves of like
Yes.
how far we've come.
So then I would add on to that.
Yeah.
And what I would say is, I would say, I want you to get in a time machine and you're going to go up into the sky and you're going to teleport to 5, 10 years out from now. And I
Mm,
want you to sit in your body, the future you, and let's go through where you are now.
yeah.
Are you only working with Fortune 500 companies?
Yeah.
Like, how many employees are around you? So, like, now that we've established, like, hey, you can do this,
Yeah.
well, now where are we going? Like, let's do it. What does it look like? What's different?
Unimaginable.
Absolutely.
Unimaginable. I
Yeah.
have this like, and that's a cool exercise maybe you want to do from improv where it's like the gossip has it. Where you stay with the team or you can do as your group and people
Mhm.
start making up stuff that is unbelievable like the
Yeah.
gossip has it that our Vistage group went to the space and we did this thing like the
Yeah.
gossip and people keep building off each other and taking it up a notch
I love that.
like round 15 it's unbelievable what's happening
Yeah.
everybody's job is to take it up a notch so that
Yes.
would be fun like
I
again
think I think that's great. I mean, I think the really beautiful thing about inspiration is it transmutes hope into faith, right?
Mm,
This hope or this dream that we had is all of a sudden the fear falls away and it's just right there.
yeah.
Like in those moments when we're inspired, like it's just right there.
That's great. So I want to thank you. We're at 27 minutes, which is unbelievable. I'm like, I always feel like I'm like, I wish podcasts were like 4 hours because I love chatting with you. I really want to compliment you on your storytelling ability, like your ability to keep people engaged and your members engaged. And I think that creates kind of like that memorable experience.
Mm.
And your ability to just foresee the future, right? And constantly innovate. And I think you're onto something with the book, like the inspiration,
Mhm.
especially with AI. I just read it that if you can articulate it, you can generate it. If you can articulate it, you can generate it. So you can have a lot of people who are inspiring people, right? And it's like, but you have to have someone give it prompts,
Yeah.
right? And be able, your ability to articulate inspiration, motivation, and just like source of, you're such a great resource and such a generous leader in our community. So definitely, if you're somebody who is listening, is local to San Diego and is seeking to find a peer-to-peer group with a leader who has this enormous emotional intelligence and ability to analyze and create and collaborate with people, I would highly recommend reach out to Danielle, reach out to me. I'll be happy to connect you. And I'm so excited to read your book. And I
Thank
feel like
you.
I've learned so much in the last 30 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm honored that you asked me. A joy to spend time with you always. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Danielle.